And I'll ask that if you're not speaking to please mute your microphone. If we are now recording. Dean Julie?
Thank you, Lou Marie. Welcome to our closing keynote session of Library Skills Week. As Lou Marie mentioned, my name is Julie Garrison and I'm the Dean of Libraries. Whether this is the first event you've attended or you've been among the 130 individuals who participated in any one of the other 22 sessions offered throughout the week, I hope that you've enjoyed our library programming. In case you've missed a session that you're interested in viewing, please know that these have been recorded and are being posted on our YouTube channel for future reference. We want to refine and continually improve on the programming we provide. You may have already been asked to complete a survey to give us feedback about a specific program you've attended throughout the week, and we'll be reaching out to you soon to get your feedback on this whole series. So please respond when you see something from us in your inbox. Beyond the library's conveniently packaged programming this week, know that our librarians and staff are available to help you with your research questions anytime. You're always welcome to contact the individuals who presented programming to learn more about a service or ask for specific assistance based on your unique needs. I'd like to take a moment to thank our instruction and outreach team of librarians for coordinating this series. Especially thanks to Juliana Espinoza, Kate Langen, and Mike Duffy for spearheading the planning and organization of the series. And thank you to Angela Brecka, Alex Teal, and Sarah Volmering for troubleshooting technology in their efforts to promote the programs to the WMU community. I'd also like to thank all of our faculty and staff from across the libraries and the others who presented on topics to help you take advantage of what our libraries have to offer, from our special collections, archives and regional history collections, resources available on a variety of disciplines, our mapping and data services, open access, open educational resources, and more. And of course, thanks to our opening and closing keynote speakers, Liz Lorbeer from WMed and Dwayne Strozney from WMU Cooley Law Library. This truly was a team effort, and I'd like to reiterate again that we're here for you to support your educational and research needs. I hope you enjoy this closing keynote session and have a wonderful, safe Halloween and weekend ahead. Now, I'll turn the program back over to Lou Marie Guth, who will introduce our closing keynote speaker.
Oh, thank you. I'm very happy to introduce Dwayne Strozney. He is the Dean or the Director of Libraries at WMU Cooley Law Libraries, based in Lansing, Michigan. And we are grateful to him for coming to talk to us about what he has available there and the services that our graduate students can look forward to and take advantage of even while they're here at Western. Thank you, and I'll refer over to you, Duane.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to do some screen sharing, and hopefully everything goes correctly. If you have problems or questions as we go through things, just post them in the chat box. I do have that up, so I am monitoring that while I go through my presentation this morning, or I guess this afternoon. Let's start with this and see if this goes correctly. Okay. So I am excited to be here today, and my topic is multidisciplinary research, legal materials to help you in any discipline. And I'm hoping that by the end of this presentation, you'll find out that there is something for everyone that deals with legal research. Okay, so what we're going to do today is cover some general ideas about research. I have a few comments to make. We're going to go through three main areas: Civics 101, which is basically just a review of the government entities and the laws that they create for us. And then legal information that is helpful to your particular research. And finally, places to find free legal information. There are expensive databases. We all know that database research can be expensive, but there are a lot of free, excellent databases out there that we can use to do and conduct our legal research. Okay, so what is your game plan? This is just me talking for a few minutes about some things that are, I think, near and dear to my heart, and I think to the librarians that helped put this week together. I want to take a few moments to discuss your research in general. People attending today and viewing this video will probably come from multiple disciplines. But I believe that as researchers, there are some commonalities on how we can all be effective and achieve personal, phenomenal results in our work product. A couple of things to keep in mind, and I tell our law students these sorts of things as well, so I think they're applicable to any research project that you're involved with. Number one, reach out to a librarian at the beginning of your work. If you haven't laid out a plan, an effective research consultation with a librarian can help you get you on that right path. Think about using materials available to you. In the real working world, research is an expense. There are both online and print resources available to you as a student that most businesses cannot cover the cost. So now as a student, you have the opportunity to experiment, look at new resources, see what's out there and available to you in your particular field. Third, you want to meet with others in your field or area of interest. Asking them what they've used for research. If they say only Google, challenge them to the validity of their final product. While Google is definitely a more reliable source than it was 10 years ago, it's certainly not the end-all be-all in many specialty areas of research. And that's the important thing. There are so many specialized databases out there that you have access to as a student. You need to take advantage of those. Finally, at the very end of your research work, revisit your librarian. Creating that relationship is helpful as your research unfolds in front of you. They may find new things along the way or suggest alternatives. Your research trail that you create is yours and unique to you, but to successfully reach the end of that trail, it will take time, organization, and above all, effort on your part. Okay, with all that out of the way, it's time to launch into my topic for the day. So remember, what is your game plan? Start with visiting the library. Okay, I'm going to ask a quick question, and if people could put something into the chat box in the next few minutes while I'm going through some of this, I think that would be helpful to me as I work through my presentation this afternoon. So if you could, in the research, in the chat box, put either your major or an area of research that you're interested in or something that you're working on. And then I'll refer to that in a few minutes once I have the opportunity to look at that information. So I want to start with, just in general, areas of research affected by law. I think a lot of people are sometimes surprised. It's very common for things that deal with manufacturing to be affected by the law. Research in science and chemistry, biology, those areas are definitely affected by some of the federal laws. If you're involved in music or any of the arts, there are a lot of things that are involved that deal with copyright and trademark. If you're involved anywhere in the health industry, nursing, medicine, and just general research. And these days, I think with COVID-19, we're hearing so much about all the drug manufacturing companies and all the research that they're doing that's going on behind the scenes. Well, I think many of you already know, and we hear it every day in the news, if nothing else, that all this research is heavily affected by the law and the processes that these manufacturers must go through to get things approved for use by humans. Or maybe you're involved in education. People involved in education certainly have a number of state laws and regulations that they fall under. It's important to remember that no matter what your field, there's probably some either state or federal law of some sort that might affect your work. And this ultimately can affect the research that you're doing as well. I'm going to talk for the next few minutes about a little civics overview. And I think the value of this is it kind of puts it all into perspective. And then when you think about your area of research, think about where it fits into this information. There are three branches of government. We know this from usually 6th, 7th, or 8th grade civics. You know, we have the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and the executive branch. And these exist at both the state and federal level. So we hear so much about federal level of these three branches lately. But in the most recent few weeks here, we've heard quite a bit about the judicial branch, for example, in the state of Michigan, that reversed the governor's or the executive branch's power. So you can see how those three branches of government interact with each other quite a bit and at different levels. Just some kind of basics about the judicial branch. At the federal level, we have the federal court cases, and everyone hears about the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court generally is a court of appeal. That means your case, if you're taking a federal court case, it started at a lower level and works its way up on appeal from one party or the other until it ultimately can rise to the U.S. Supreme Court. There are district court jurisdictions and court of appeals as well. In Michigan, for example, there are two federal district courts. There's the Eastern District based in Detroit, and there's the Western District based in Grand Rapids. Cases out of those district courts could ultimately, on appeal, end up in the United States Supreme Court. As far as state courts, Michigan is set up very similar to the federal level. There are circuit and district courts, which are at the county level usually and deal with particular topics or cases of certain size or criminal cases. So they are broken up a little bit more than federal district court cases. There's also a Michigan Court of Appeals, which is relatively new, has not been in existence the whole time Michigan has been a state. The Court of Appeals came into being in the later 20th century. And so those court cases may be important to you when you're doing research that deals with state laws. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So then we move into the legislative branch. And the legislative branch really is Congress. When you hear and vote for someone at the state level or the federal level to be your state representative or your federal senator, those are the people in the legislative branch that create the laws that this country runs on or the state runs on. And I think a lot of people might differ as to which branch seems to be more powerful, but ultimately the legislative branch creates a lot of federal laws at the federal level that empower either executive branches, executive branch agencies to make regulations, or they might have approval power for the judicial branch. We saw this actually earlier this week at the Supreme Court level. So the legislative branch creates statutes. And in Michigan, they're called Michigan compiled laws. At the federal level, they're called United States Code. Now, of course, maybe some of you over the years have seen the cartoon series that tells you how a bill becomes a law. But ultimately, there is a lot of research and discussion and debate that goes on before some wording is adopted as a federal law. And there are many places you can go to look for those materials. And I'll talk about some of that towards the end of this session today. So statutes began as a bill. One of the legislators has to introduce it into that house, either the House of Representatives or the Senate, and it works its way through. Once it's approved by both houses of the legislature, it becomes a statute. Those statutes, again, in Michigan are called Michigan compiled laws. The statutes at the federal law become the United States Code. There are annotated statutes at both levels as well, put out by other publishers other than the federal government. What the annotations do is they give summaries of cases that interpret the statute, and that helps your research kind of dovetail together. You can take your federal or state statute and see if there have been any cases that have been decided that talked about that statute. So if you're trying to challenge something or just see how something's interpreted, you can use those two together, those two pieces of information from the courts and information from the legislature to interpret what is going on. The executive branch, I think a lot of people feel the executive branch is the president, and they don't realize that there are a large number of agencies underneath the auspices of the president and his cabinet. Most of the cabinet members for the president are in charge of an agency. And there's a number of them. There's the Department of Education, the Department of Treasury. So ones that you're very familiar with when we have to file taxes or when you're taking out a student loan. Okay, so there's a lot of agencies that affect our daily lives. And those agencies operate under a series of regulations. Similar to the way that the legislature introduces a bill and it works its way through Congress, an agency introduces proposed regulations for comment. And usually the comment marking period is a month or two. An agency might say to the population of the country, they'll say, here are some proposed regulations. We would like some feedback on them from you. And people will comment on different proposed regulations. Now, generally, they tend to be people who are involved in that area of law. And if those regulations are affecting education, for example, you might see presidents from different colleges and universities commenting on a proposed regulation, saying, oh, this is going to be too restrictive to our students, or this will not allow our faculty to do the type of research we want them to. So you can see the agencies ask for feedback, and then they may tweak the information that they get, or they may not. That's up to them ultimately. And they'll put a final publication date of their regulations, and they become in effect. Now, something unusual that a lot of people aren't aware of is that actually there are judges of sorts in a lot of the agencies. And so there are agency decisions. The Department of Education might have hearings, or the Treasury Department might have hearings where someone might be appealing their tax information. And so what they want to do is give people an opportunity to appeal any wrongdoing that they might be accused of. And so there's agency decisions. National Labor Board has hearings. The FCC has hearings. There's the Federal Communications Commission. So a lot of federal agencies have hearings and decisions that come out of those hearings. That, in conjunction with their regulations, create the laws from that executive branch and those agencies. Okay, so now that we have our basic civics over for the day, we can talk about legal information that's helpful to your specific research. What type of research or work are you involved with? Are you beginning a daycare or working in a daycare? Are you going to be working in food research and development. Maybe you're writing music, or maybe you're working with driverless cars. Think of all the regulations and statutes that must be coming into effect because of this whole new area of our lives. And then once you actually can define what you're going to be researching or working with, you have to figure out, is this at the federal level or is it the state level? Or is it a combination of both? Now, teachers, for example, get licensed through the state level. They have to take tests in their subject areas. They have to do student teaching. There's a certain number of rules and regulations that they have to follow to be approved to teach in a classroom. Okay, but if you're teaching maybe at a university or college level, there might be some additional things that you need to take into consideration from a federal level. If your institution is getting federal funding for any particular programming, you might have to do annual or semi-annual reports to the federal government, not to the state government. So you can see that determining where you fall into place, you know, is this a state or federal issue, can really help determine where you're going to end up conducting some research. So, are there regulations or statutes? That's the other big question. Am I affected by legislation, or am I affected by an executive agency of some sort? And those two things are sometimes a little bit more confusing. Licensing usually falls under regulations. Research and development also usually falls under regulations. Crimes and any sentencing related to crimes, however, almost always fall under statutes. Okay, so there's a federal statute that says it's a crime not to distribute certain narcotics or to carry them across state line. And there are certain rules that if you break them, they are federal crimes. Okay, and so the sentencing is usually laid out in statutes that are passed by Congress. Often, though, statutes are really broad in nature, and what they do is create a really broad statute that, that gives the authority to an agency to develop regulations. So a lot of times, you can think of a statute as being kind of vague and broad in nature, and regulations as being more specific. Now, and a good example of where that might be is that the Department of Homeland Security has the authority to lay out very more specific, detailed regulations about when they might monitor people. Whereas there's probably a federal statute that just created that department and not much more. So there is a federal statute. It creates that agency. The agency falls under the jurisdiction of the executive branch, and that statute might tell us that, but it's not going to give us specific details about what that agency is going to be doing. For that, we're going to need to look at the regulations. A good area, a couple good areas to where this might come into play are the Food and Drug Administration might have some very general statutes that the federal senators and representatives are passing, but the real details have to be put and spelled out in regulations by the FDA. They're the ones who deal with all the particulars on a day-to-day basis. And I think anyone who's doing research at this level, once you figure out where your the law is that you need to look at, I think you see real clearly that path and say, oh, I can see that these are regulations that get updated every couple of years. Or if they haven't been updated for years, maybe there's statutes that get updated more regularly. So those are the two things to keep in mind when you're conducting any type of legal research. Okay, now, where do you go to find free legal information? There's a couple of places I like to send people to, And I think these are probably pretty helpful. If you're a Western Michigan University student, I would say take a look at the library research guides that the library has available to you. There's a really good one created by Lou Marie. It's a law live guide, and it's kind of nice because what it does for you is that it spells out all the different databases, electronic databases that you have available to you, and how you get to them, and the type of information they contain. So it's nice, it's straightforward, and Lou Marie and I actually looked at it a little bit more closely yesterday together, but I've looked at it a number of different times and have suggested that people use that as a guideline if they're going to do legal research. The nice thing about the research guides is, let's face it, they're available 24/7. And in today's distanced electronic world, it's nice to have a starting place. So maybe you don't talk to a librarian right away. You look and see what's available to you electronically. But then at some point, go to the librarian, reference librarian, and say, I have some more questions. I'm not finding in this database what I thought I would find. Is there some place else I should be looking? But the research guides that you have available to you online are excellent places to begin. The WMU Cooley Law Library, I tell our students multiple times during their 3 years in law school that our online catalog, which is called CoolCat, is really a legal Google. So it's nice, and you can go into Google Legal, which is a subpart of Google overall, and do research that way. But think of it this way. We, as a group of library employees, have taken all the things that we think are most valuable in print and now these days in electronic format and put them together for you. So if you're interested in education law, for example, you could go to the Cooley library webpage and do a search on education law. And you would find out that we actually have a pretty good amount of materials on education law in print and online. And that's the beauty of the online world, is we can add those records into a catalog for you as a researcher. So again, you can do your research. If you can't get into the library physically, you can just click on a facet, narrow your search to electronic materials, and take a look at some of those and see if that gets you on the right track for the research you're conducting. That's kind of the general overall research trick anyway, is that use the facets available in your online catalogs that you're looking at to narrow your search. You can limit it to electronic only. If you're not finding what you're looking for, have questions about it, make sure you're asking a librarian one way or the other so that you're getting some of that information explained to you. A lot of researching, legal research and otherwise, has what I call the Google box. And the Google box is nice to have, but it's just a box, and you type in whatever you might think is going to be effective and create the search results for what you're looking for. What the librarian can do is help you take that one step further, analyze that material, and maybe research a little bit more defined to come up with better results for what you're looking for. So those are two real handy and affordable and easy to go to locations. A couple of other places I like to send students and researchers to. One is the Legal Information Institute at Cornell Law School. The nice thing about the Legal Information Institute is that it is a combination of a law school and some other private entities working together to make sure that federal and state law is preserved electronically. And so you can find on LII, you can find federal cases, federal statutes, and federal regulations. And you can also find state material in those three areas as well. They've done an excellent job. They've been around for almost as long as the web has been around. So since the early 90s, and they've upgraded their research platforms over the years so that you can research within their service very nicely. And it's a really nice product to have available, and there's no cost to using it. The other place where I think researchers across many disciplines find useful information is at congress.gov. And congress.gov is the federal government link to all legislative materials. So remember how I was talking about earlier in the civics lesson, is that there were hearings and bills and reports and public laws. Okay, all those bits and pieces of information that go together to making a final federal statute, all those bits and pieces of information are available through congress.gov. Now, there are, they go fairly far back in history, and there are some private vendors. I know that the law school subscribes to it, and I can't remember if Waldo subscribes to it or not, that have a lot of the legislative history information. So make sure that you take a look at congress.gov if you're looking for federal legislative material. Okay. I am going to, let's see, what do I want to do here? I'm going to stop sharing this for just a moment. And I'm going to take a look at the things I have in the chat box, okay? So that I can kind of talk a little bit about some of the topics that I've seen come up. I would say it looks like there are really topics across the board. But remember, if you're involved in anything of the arts, literary arts, music, things like trademark and copyright come into play very regularly. And any type of research you're doing, make sure that you're aware of the laws as they surround what you're doing concerning copyright and trademark. Okay, higher education and education in general. Again, I mentioned a little bit earlier how education has two parts to it: the state level and the federal level. The federal level tends to be more higher education. The state level more K through 12. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a dividing line. Okay. Anything with social and health policy, again, those are going to be, I think, a lot of times you might be doing research that is affected by different regulations. Okay, so if you want to test something, if you're a psychology major and you want to test something on 250 people, are there any kind of regulations that affect that? Are there certain things you should or shouldn't be doing? Is there funding available? Maybe at the federal level, you might find funding available because of it. And once you secure funding in any type of research, really, what happens when you secure those funds? Are there rules and information you need to provide to the federal government because they're providing the funding for that? So, just a hint. I think there almost always are. And so you need to make sure that you're going to be aware of what you need to do to successfully conduct your research and then ultimately report back to your funding entity if you've received funding in one way or another. Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that you're aware that there are so many different areas of the law, and it's not unusual for things to be affected by law one way or another. At this point, I'm going to ask if there are questions of any sort. My information, if anyone ever has a question, you can certainly contact me at my email address, which is strojnyd@cooley.edu. I'm not always at my desk these days because we work remotely so often, but my voicemail goes to email. So I'm at 517-371-5140, extension 3401. A couple of things before I wrap up and ask if there are questions for you to ask me today is there a legal research component to or is there a legal component to my research that I'm overlooking? And I think you might find it helpful to think a little bit more in depth before you just jump into your research, because there might be some aspect to it that you didn't think of in the first place. The second thing I want you to think about is, how does the law affect my research? Like I said, if you're securing federal funding of some sort, or funding from your state agency or something along those lines, there are probably going to be a lot of rules in place that you need to make sure you follow. That all has a legal component to it. And then one of the last things to think about is, am I protected by the law, or are there rules that I should be following that I'm not aware of? Okay, so it's kind of a preemptive research before you dig into maybe your main topic that might be helpful to you to make sure that you're protected by the law as well. There's nothing worse than getting in the middle of some sort of research and finding out that you should have been doing things very differently, and all of a sudden you might be liable for something that has negatively happened because of what you're doing, or vice versa, that you're affected by someone negatively because of what they're doing. So you want to make sure that you're protected, and people that you're working with are protected as well. Okay, with that, I am open to any type of questions that anyone might have. I know that there's a lot I went through in a relatively short period of time, but I think it's important to realize that ultimately legal research does have a little bit of a play in almost any type of research that someone might be conducting. So, any questions? Fire away.
Dwayne, I'm monitoring the chat. This is Lou Marie. I'm monitoring the chat for any questions. So if anyone has any they'd like to post, I can bring those forward.
Okay.
I was wondering if you'd be willing to, since you have your screen up, go to that law guide you mentioned to briefly discuss what's on the page, and maybe see what are the things that are accessible to WMU students at Cooley, because I know that a lot of your content is only available for Cooley people, but also what could we refer people to you for?
Okay, very good. I can do that. Let me move around here just a minute. One of the things that I've done over the years is I've tried to negotiate a deal that all students can use, all WMU students can use some of our databases, and so that sometimes is to the student's advantage. But if nothing else, we really work hard to at least conduct mediated access. So if you don't have access directly to one of our databases that we have available, do not hesitate to make sure you contact a librarian to see if you can get information through a mediated access. We could run a search for you. We can come up with some results that we can forward to you, and maybe that'll get you started. Okay. Okay, I am going to try to share this screen. Oh, let's see.
And then after we spent a few minutes looking at this, I do have a couple questions in the chat that I'd like to share.
Sure. Okay, so this is our catalog. And you can tell that we've kind of changed our focus a little bit in the last few months, because we're online all the way through April already of next year, but we've created digital reserves. We have electronic resources, which, if you look at our list of electronic resources, We do say, you know, if you're on campus, if you're remote, who has access, who doesn't. Okay. But what I want people to remember is that I want to say the on campus and remote, there is some limitation to that in the fact that we often are allowed to do mediated access. For example, you know, anything like our FAST case, even though it says it's available to students via library sign-in. Let's see, we have First Search. Certain other people can use it through us. So there's a number of things that we have that are not all boilerplate, but this is basically boilerplate information. Okay. So I always say it never hurts to ask when you can't get to something like going, now what do I do? I guess I have to just skip using that. I always ask, and I think I've done that with some of you too at Waldo. And then our catalog is just, you know, like I said, if you want to do research on education law, there's, you know, we use Innovative Interfaces, which is very similar to MELCAT, if you're familiar with the statewide system. And the nice thing about it is, I like about it is that on the left-hand side, there are all these really nice facets to narrow our search from. I mean, we can just do by subject. We can do online if we wanted to. You can see we have a lot of online things available. We can do it by location. Maybe I can get to Grand Rapids. Our Grand Rapids campus actually has an excellent education law collection. When that campus closes next year, it's slated to close next summer, that material will be brought over to Lansing. That is one collection I'm very proud of. So anyway, so when you're doing research in our catalog, you know, it becomes a little bit more than just printed materials. There's ways to do that. The other thing that we do is we're very similar to the catalog that WMU has in general, and that is we have links and to articles, and many of them are through Hein Online. I think many of you are available with the familiar with the Hein Online information. So that's our research there. Let's see. Now I want to go to the Waldo one, just so if people are not familiar with that. Okay, and you know, this information's current. So Lou Marie does a really nice job of keeping it current. And I just want to say that, so there are some things actually that are a little bit familiar. We have access to these MEL items. These things down here. We have Hein Online, much like you do. We have access to something called Making of Modern Law, which is 17th and 18th century materials that are digitized, and those links are in our catalog. So that's the nice thing about it. Let's see, Julianne asked a really nice question. If you were a first-year law student, what is a hidden gem resource that would be useful to know? I think that taking advantage of the online databases that the law school subscribes to is kind of nice, and that's Westlaw, Lexis, or LexisNexis, depending on how you know it from your undergrad days. We also have access to Bloomberg Law. In Bloomberg, you know, they're a large information gatherer and distributor in this country. They bought Bureau of National Affairs, which is an excellent legal publisher, about 20 years ago. And so all that information is part of BNA law. So those, as a first-year student, now, generally as a first-year student, a lot of what you do is reading, not so much research. But the reading of cases and things can be done on Westlaw and Lexis relatively easy. And it's good to get to be familiar with those databases, because ultimately you're going to use them for more in-depth legal research as you continue through your legal education. And then ultimately, when you get out of law school, now they're not cheap, but in the old days, you used to pay per minute for everything. A lot of databases were that way, free for you in graduate or undergraduate school, expensive to you once you're out in the real working world. A lot of companies, Westlaw and Lexis included, have a portion of their database maybe just for Michigan lawyers or for Texas lawyers, and that's all you have to purchase access to. So that's kind of nice and handy, and it's much more affordable. And also, most state bar associations in the country, so all 50 states have state bar associations. They have access to either something called Fast Case or Casemaker, which are the less glitzy versions of Lexis and Westlaw. But they're free services, and they give you access to federal and state judicial, legislative, and executive branch information. So they're excellent resources to have. So the hidden gem resource, I would say, is take advantage of what's given to you. And I think ultimately you become a better researcher, and then very ultimately at the end become a better practitioner, at least from the legal end of things. Now, we have a number of law students that may be either a nurse or a doctor, or they're involved in some other type of research. I actually had a student last summer who was a police officer, but also had a PhD in opera. So you can imagine the kind of things this student is interested in researching, and they kind of go across the board. So anyway.
I'd like to ask you two questions from the chat, Dwayne, that I think kind of go hand in hand.
Sure.
The first one is from Jason, and it was asking about what is the most consequential law issue you've assisted someone with. And then the other one is from Diane, or I'm sorry, from Kate, which I think is one that I had to deal with as an intern at a law library, which is, where does the line end between giving reference assistance and giving legal advice, and how do you manage that fine line?
Those are all excellent questions. The most consequential issue I provide research assistance with is probably we support our faculty and students that are dealing with the DNA research to get people off of the death row. And that clinic has been very successful. The DNA research is kind of tricky, and there's a lot of legal aspects of the death penalty in general. So we've provided them with a lot of research, and I think that has been something that's been most interesting to me, and probably most satisfying when you help them start some of that research and see that they're successful in what their goal is. Let's see, as to public health, a lot of public health, I'm looking at some of this too, public health for the social workers and health in the health fields. A lot of that is really, even though the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services is involved in it, and there are a lot of state regulations, a lot of that is dealt with they adopt whatever is coming down to them from the federal level. So there really is, I think, value in becoming familiar with regulations if you're doing that type of research. The problem is, let's see, any information beyond the regulations, there is not much written about this type of law. And sadly, so there's an opportunity if you have students coming to you doing some sort of legal research in the health fields, that type of material could easily be turned into a good article or a book, because there's not so much written about that. And then the last thing I want to talk about, you were mentioning here in the chat, is where does reference stop and legal advice begin? Okay, so I always want to use us. You can teach a person to fish, or you can give them the fish. If you're giving them the fish, you're probably practicing law. That is what we talk about at the reference desk. Where do we draw that line? We want to teach people how to fish. So, excuse me, we also really do this with faculty too, because faculty come to us with a question, they want an answer. And we'll say, we might teach them without even knowing that they know we're teaching them something new. We'll say, well, look at this resource. This is how you use it. Here's some of the results. Let's work on it together, sort of thing. And so they ultimately learn how to use a new resource. So learning how to use the index for the state statutes is really the best way for you to find a state statute versus me giving you that number. So let's see. So that, I think that's where we draw the line. I mean, it's straightforward. We get phone calls, as you can imagine, all the time about someone saying, well, my brother's in jail and he did this and this and this, and I need some information to help me get him out of jail. And the first thing we'll say is, well, we can't do that. We can't practice law. We can provide them with clinics that might be able to help them. But then we also send them to different places. Either we invite them to come in if they want to do research and say, we'll help you, guide you through some of the research process, but you need to determine what is good for you. And then we'll also send them to some online things. The Library of Michigan does have a law library section to it these days, and they do answer some more detailed questions, but I think ultimately they draw that line too, that they can give legal advice. And most of our reference librarians have law degrees, but that is, our goal is not to, we're not licensed to give legal advice at the desk. I hope that answers that question. Anything else?
Oh, well, thank you, Dwayne. If I could ask one selfish question,
Certainly.
when you were demonstrating the website earlier, I saw you had a highlighting tool. Could you tell us what that technology is that you're using?
Okay. Yes, I love using it. So I had to teach. I've been teaching a class called Advocacy, which is our second semester of research and writing for law students. They take it in their third semester of school, actually, but it's their second semester of research and writing. And we were in the middle of teaching it in March, went online and finished it up online. So then I had a section to teach in the summer completely online. I'm like, I have to get very comfortable with using WebEx. And when you're sharing in WebEx, there is a annotate tool in the drop-down sharing menu, which I don't like it because you always have to click on it to get it. But once you click on the far right, it's called Annotate. And it allows me, I can change the color if I want to do something like saying, I like this one a lot. And if I might say, I'm not sure if I like this one as much, I can do that. There's a whole bunch of different things I can do. A whole toolbar comes up on the left side of the screen when you're doing that. The problem is to get out of it, to move to another screen, or I cannot even click to stop sharing, or I have to click on the annotate button again to stop annotating. Then it does clear everything off. If there's a different way to save any of that, I have not figured that out yet. But yeah, it's definitely a great tool to use when you're teaching and working with people. So that is your WebEx lesson for the day as well. So.
Well, thank you, Dwayne. We use WebEx at Western Michigan, so I'm sure that several people find that handy. Well, I'd like to thank you again for coming in and finishing up what I think has been a wonderful week of Library Skills Week. And thanks again to Juliana and everyone who has helped to put this together and attend. I think that it's been wonderful working in this new format. So with that, I'll end the recording and end the meeting, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. I appreciate it.